Hey everyone, this is the You Are On Your Own edition of the Rockstar Minutes. Let's dive into this really quick. Today's is going to be quick and to the point, but there are some fun headlines. The Bank of Canada is poised to lose money for the first time on rising interest rate expenses. This is an article from the Globe and Mail shared on November 15th, so super recently. What is today's date? Was that yesterday? 2 days ago. So this article comes out. Check out some of these clips. The central bank is expecting total losses of between $5 billion and $6 billion over the next few years. Roughly estimated, the bank should return to positive net interest income sometime between 2024 and 2025. So remember, this is an institution that creates money out of thin air to feed into our economy and to give to our government when our government sends bonds their way, and they can't figure out how to make money even though they make the stuff for a living. The next clip, at the very least, the bank will stop sending profits to the federal government for several years, potentially costing public coffers something in the range of $1 billion a year based on the pre-pandemic average amount of those remittances. So there we go. Our Bank of Canada, who makes money. And I know there's going to be some people out there who, will challenge they make base money and they kind of lend it out. The bottom line is they make money happen out of thin air. They are losing money, even though they're in the they're in the business of making it. Then they go on Twitter the same day that article comes out, and they start teaching all of us through a 6 Twitter thread on consumer price index and inflation. And they go on to tell us what CPI is. And the last tweet is really powerful. It says, right now, inflation is too high. That means your money doesn't buy as much as it used to. Yeah, no kidding. Thank you for that. So we're raising interest rates to tame inflation and protect your purchasing power. Here's my beef with this statement. The reason inflation is too high is because they made it too high. When you inflate the money supply, it's coming from the Bank of Canada. They're the ones who reduce interest rates and promote inflation. They're the ones that created the inflation that existed over the last few years. They're the ones that put the kindling in the fire. And now they're here telling us, well, you know what? My bad. We made it too high. And now we're just going to raise interest rates. So they encouraged everybody through low interest rates. That's an economic signal that the value of dollars is not valuable. Borrow the dollars, buy hard assets. So borrow money and buy things, which consumers did. And then they said, oh my gosh, that got out of control. You all borrow too much money. So now we're going to have to raise interest rates. So we gave you the economic signal with rates too low to go out and borrow. But then when you borrowed too much, they said, oh, well, that's bad. Now everything costs too much because there was so much demand. We're going to raise rates and punish you for all that borrowing. Do you see the madness that the Bank of Canada is? So, they make this target of 2% inflation. This is their famous 2% inflation target. They're the ones who create the target of 2% inflation. They then miss their own target. It's either too low, but often it's just way too high. And then they ultimately blame Canadians through the media. They'll go out and say, well, there's employment's too high and wages are too high. And, we really people are borrowing too much. It's not our fault. We made interest rates low, but it's really not our fault that people borrowed. Even though we make interest rates low, people shouldn't borrow so much money. So it's never their fault. So just to repeat, they create the target of 2% inflation. They're the ones who chose that target. They miss the target pretty much constantly. And then they blame Canadians for, what's happening in the economy. So this is why we say you are on your own. Your economic future, your financial future is ultimately in your own hands. These institutions are not going to help any of us, at least in our opinion, they won't. So now let's move over to the government. So we went to the Bank of Canada. Here's another one that got circulated quite a lot over the last little while, that Ottawa came out and said it reveals its plan to welcome 500,000 immigrants per year by the year 2025. And that kind of got everyone's attention for many reasons. It's a lot of people, first of all, but usually it'll kind of boil down to housing. Where are we going to house all these people that are coming in here? We already have high housing costs, high housing prices. What's going to happen with this? But here's the thing. Ben Rabideau put this out. Our friend Ben does a great job with this. He's basically saying, well, we're kind of already there. Canada has admitted 485,000 permanent residents over the past year. So this target of 500,000, here it is, this blue line you can see. This target that they're saying of 500,000, it's like, well, we're kind of already there. And if history proves correct, Canada always overshoots its targets. For years we've been watching this. So we've been watching this since the targets were 250,000. And when the targets were 250,000, we were starting to overshoot them then. You can see back here, 2016, really things started to change. And then they just kept overshooting them. And then we just keep upping what our targets are, but we keep exceeding those targets. And, our parents, Nick and my parents are immigrants to this country. This isn't us saying there shouldn't be immigrants to the country, but where is the coordination between the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal governments on housing, infrastructure, roads, hospitals, nurses, hospital beds? For when we increase the population to these levels, who is planning for the infrastructure to support it? I'm only laughing because it's so ridiculous. So if they're now coming out with a target of 500,000, are we really going to hit 550 and 600? Like, is this actually what's going to happen? Are we going to exceed 500,000? Time will tell. And then Ben put this out, which is a great stat. The U.S. population is 330 million people, 333 million, sorry. The population growth in the past year was 944,000 people. Canada, with 1/10 of its population of the U.S. at 39 million people, and I'm rounding a little bit there, had a population growth in the past year of 703,000 people. We are 1/10 the size of our economic neighbor. And we are letting in almost, I know it is less, but we are letting in almost, or not letting in, because this is a pure population growth. So between immigration and natural increase, we have a population growth of almost the same. We are 1/10 the size of the country next door, and our population growth is almost, I know I'm percentages, it is less, but this is pretty close for such a small population base. Who is planning all the infrastructure here? Again, I'm going to repeat it. Roads, hospitals, hospital beds, salaries for nurses, teachers, housing. We can't just have our population increase like this and not have coordinated plans. And this is kind of Canada's, just going back to this point, this is kind of Canada's strategy. When you manipulate the monetary policy the way Bank of Canada does, and we don't have true economic signals because our money is manipulated in the way it is very difficult for the private sector and entrepreneurs to even support some of this population growth, because none of us entrepreneurs out here really know what's going on with the money. Do you borrow or not borrow? When the Bank of Canada tells you rates are really low, do you borrow to build new things to support this population growth? Or do you hide because you don't know if they're going to raise interest rates soon and you have to protect yourself and play defense? It's really tricky. The Smart Prosperity Institute put out this report in the summer, and on page 21, there's this fascinating stat breakdown of the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So this is the Greater Golden Horseshoe here in Ontario. And it's mapping out what their estimates are for housing across all the regions that make up the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So you can see them here: Peel, Toronto, York, Halton, Durham, Hamilton, Waterloo, and so on. There's Niagara there. And then some of the Hemson growth plans that have been used to make some of the official projections in the province. And you can see some of the official projections are saying, there's going to be a need of housing units, and we should be able to complete these housing units, and it's about 700,000. Whereas the Smart Prosperity Institute is saying, well, you know what? According to our math, we actually need 1.2 million houses to support this population growth. That's a difference of 500,000 houses at the end of this 10-year period. 500,000 houses represents many cities. In the town of Oakville, where I live, the population is just about 200,000. If I had to guess, that means there's about 100,000 housing units in this city. That means at the end of 10 years, we're short 5 towns of Oakville in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And the most interesting part here is it says, the Hemson forecasts are not simply predictions of what will happen. Instead, they are used by municipalities for planning processes to ensure that their official plan will enable enough housing. So this means this 700,000 isn't like guaranteed to happen. This is just hopefully the province has enough plans and enough, they're putting enough things in place to allow for 700,000 to be built. What happens through the manipulation of money and economic signaling if some developers, like we have seen, choose not to develop some land because of things like land development costs and different charges that cities cost to do these things. And what happens if we fall below this number? How short of housing are we going to be in this area? Who's looking at this stuff? So as a real estate investor who owns property in this area going forward, it looks like there's going to be a lot of demand. So right now interest rates are high and prices are swinging, but it doesn't look like there's going to be a shortfall in demand of houses, far from it. So that's the kind of stuff that gets our attention. And it's why when you look at the Bank of Canada, who ultimately controls our monetary policy, or you look at our government who does things like announce immigration targets, but really we see very little coordination between federal level government, provincial level government, and municipal level government. Where are we going to house all the people for the population growth that we're going to see over the next few years? And ultimately, this is why we believe you are on your own for your finances and your future. You need to decide and kind of dive into this stuff yourself. Do not depend on, and I don't think anyone does. I mean, maybe that sounds ridiculous, but don't depend on any of these central authorities to kind of act in any of our best interests. Maybe we're jaded. I think we are a little bit, but we believe to live life on your terms, you need to take your financial future and the responsibility of that directly yourself. Anyway, that's it for this Rockstar Minutes. Until next time, your life, your terms.